Simone Weil was born on February 3, 1909, in Paris, into a Jewish family of intellectuals. Her father, Adolf Weil, was a mathematics teacher, and her mother, Adele, came from a background of educated professionals. From the beginning, Simone was immersed in a world of books, ideas, and rigorous intellectual expectation. She was the eldest of 5 children, and her early life combined privilege with the weight of familial expectation. Her parents valued education, logic, and precision, and Simone absorbed these lessons, displaying extraordinary intellectual ability from a young age. Yet beneath her brilliance lay a profound sensitivity to suffering, injustice, and human fragility, traits that would define her philosophical and ethical work throughout her life. As a child, Weil excelled academically. She studied literature, mathematics, philosophy, and history, demonstrating an insatiable curiosity and a willingness to challenge conventional thought. By adolescence, she had already developed a keen interest in moral and social questions. She was drawn to the tension between theory and lived experience, between abstract principles and concrete realities. Early exposure to the works of Greek philosophers, classical literature, and the social criticism of modern thinkers shaped her understanding of human nature, justice, and the ethical responsibilities of the individual within society. Her precocious intellect was matched by a deep emotional sensitivity, making her acutely aware of the suffering of others and the injustices embedded in social and political structures. Weil entered the École Normale Supérieure in 1926, one of the most prestigious academic institutions in France, where she studied philosophy. Her time at the university was characterized by intense intellectual engagement and the development of a disciplined analytical mind. She excelled in logic, metaphysics, and ethics, engaging with the works of Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Kant, and modern philosophers. Yet Weil's philosophical pursuits were inseparable from her moral preoccupations. She became increasingly concerned with questions of oppression, inequality, and the human capacity to endure suffering. She did not view philosophy as a mere academic exercise, but as a means to confront the ethical realities of life. In the early 1930s, Weil began teaching philosophy at secondary schools, but she found academic life insufficient to address the social injustices she observed. She became deeply concerned with the plight of the working class and the realities of industrial labor. In 1934, she left teaching to work as a manual laborer in factories, including a car factory in Renault, and later in a paper mill. Weil subjected herself to the same grueling conditions as the workers, enduring long hours, exhaustion, and poor living conditions. She believed that direct experience of physical and social suffering was essential to understanding the human condition. For Weil, attention to the lived experience of others was both a moral duty and a source of insight, a method of philosophical inquiry grounded in empathy and solidarity. Weil's experiences in the factories profoundly influenced her thought. She witnessed the dehumanizing effects of industrial labor, the alienation of workers from their own activity, and the systemic inequalities that perpetuated suffering. These observations reinforced her commitment to understanding oppression not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible reality. Weil's philosophy emphasized the importance of attention, a disciplined awareness of the world and the suffering of others, as a form of ethical engagement. She argued that genuine attention requires humility, suspension of self-interest, and a willingness to encounter truth without distortion. For Weil, attention was both a spiritual practice and a tool for moral insight, enabling one to perceive reality with clarity and respond with justice. During this period, Weil also engaged deeply with political and social theory. She was critical of both fascism and communism, recognizing the dangers of authoritarianism and the dehumanizing effects of ideologically driven systems. While sympathetic to the struggles of workers, she rejected blind adherence to political movements that ignored moral and ethical considerations. Weil maintained an independent perspective, combining rigorous analysis with moral seriousness, and insisting that ethical integrity must guide both thought and action. Her commitment to justice and attention to suffering transcended conventional political categories, reflecting a profound engagement with the human condition rather than partisan ideology. Weil's concern with suffering extended to her religious and spiritual reflections. Although born into a secular Jewish family, she developed a deep engagement with Christian thought, particularly the writings of the Gospels. She was drawn to the themes of humility, sacrifice, and compassion, seeing in them a call to confront suffering with awareness and moral responsibility. Weil's spirituality was unorthodox. She did not convert formally, but integrated religious insight into a philosophical framework centered on attention, obligation, and the ethical significance of suffering. She viewed human suffering as an inevitable aspect of existence, and she argued that responding to it with understanding, care, and attention is the highest ethical duty. In the late 1930s, Weil became increasingly involved in the political crises engulfing Europe. She traveled to Spain during the Civil War, working in support of the Republican cause. She sought to understand the experience of those living under extreme conditions of conflict, oppression, and fear. Her observations reinforced her belief that ethical action requires engagement with reality as it is, not as it should be, and that intellectual abstraction divorced from concrete suffering is inadequate. Weil's approach combined acute observation, moral seriousness, and a commitment to understanding both the psychological and material dimensions of human life. Weil's health was fragile throughout her life. She suffered from chronic illnesses and was deeply affected by the physical strain of her factory work and austere lifestyle. Her commitment to solidarity with the suffering often led her to self-imposed deprivation, fasting, and physical austerity, practices she believed sharpened her moral and spiritual insight. Weil saw suffering not as an end in itself, but as a medium for clarity, a means to cultivate attention, empathy, and ethical responsibility. Her personal austerity, though extreme, was inseparable from her philosophical method, reflecting her belief that ethical understanding requires confrontation with the reality of pain and limitation. During World War II, Weil fled occupied France, ultimately finding refuge in England. She worked with organizations supporting French exiles and contributed to the Free French cause. Despite the relative safety of exile, she remained preoccupied with the suffering of Europe, the plight of the oppressed, and the moral responsibilities of intellectuals. Her writings from this period, including essays on oppression, justice, and attention, reflect a synthesis of philosophical rigor, ethical concern, and acute social observation. Weil argued that attention to suffering is not passive observation, but an active ethical stance, requiring engagement, reflection, and responsiveness. Simone Weil died on August 24, 1943, in Ashford, England, at the age of 34. Her death, resulting from malnutrition exacerbated by her fragile health and prolonged fasting, exemplified the intensity with which she lived her ethical convictions. Throughout her brief life, Weil combined intellectual brilliance with moral courage, a relentless focus on the realities of suffering, and a disciplined attention to the world as it is. Her legacy endures not only in philosophy, but in moral and spiritual thought, emphasizing the ethical necessity of awareness, compassion, and engagement with the realities of human suffering. More than 70 years after her death, Simone Weil is remembered as a thinker who bridged philosophy, spirituality, and social observation. She demonstrated that intellectual inquiry is inseparable from ethical responsibility, that understanding the mind and society requires confronting suffering, and that attention to others is both a moral practice and a path to clarity. Weil's life exemplifies the integration of thought, experience, and moral engagement, showing that true understanding arises not from abstraction alone, but from disciplined attention to the human condition, and that the pursuit of justice is inseparable from an awareness of pain, limitation, and the demands of ethical living.